In this series of videos, we are going to talk about solid structures. This is covered in chapter 10.6 of the OpenStax chemistry textbook. And we're going to focus on crystalline structures. And in this first lecture, I'm just going to review solid materials briefly. So we have two types of solid materials. We have crystalline materials and amorphous materials. And the difference between these two is the amount of order that exists in the arrangement of the atoms. So in a crystalline solid, there's a lot of order. Everything is in a precise position, and each atom is in the same position relative to others as another atom would be. In an amorphous solid, there's a lot more chaos, so there's less order. And individual atom may have more or less immediate contacts with other atoms compared to a different atom in the substance. And so it isn't as uniform. And this part of our class is going to focus on crystalline structures. So here's just a few examples of crystalline solids. So I think one of the ones that we use the most when we introduce this in chemistry class is sodium chloride. It's the solid that we are all so familiar with. It's just table salt. And it has a really simple structure. It's alternating sodium and cations and chlorine anions, which is represented by these green and purple balls on the screen here in this crystalline solid right here. And so in this case, we would have anions that would be larger. So those would be our green atoms right here. And our sodium ions would be a cation, and so it would be a smaller atom. And these are just packed next to each other, alternating in a 1-to-1 ratio. And if you look at this in a microscope, it looks like little tiny itty-bitty cubes, just like the crystal structure would suggest from the arrangement of atoms being just a 1-to-1 ratio and stacked next to each other. So some other common crystalline solids in our life are diamond. Maybe not that I own a diamond, I guess, but I know about diamonds. And that's just carbon atoms arranged, and these are actually bonded to one another, but in a crystalline structure that's tetrahedral arrangement around each of these carbon atoms. Graphite is another way that carbon can arrange itself in a crystalline structure, where they bond to other carbon atoms, but they'll form sheets of carbon atoms bonded together. And that gives us a structure that's graphite. It's not as strong as diamond by any means. So here's a few other crystalline solids based on carbon. It can just do so many different things. Carbon is really versatile. So here's graphite on the surface right here that we're showing. And you can see it's essentially these carbon atoms are forming these little hexagons that are interlinking. And it kind of creates this honeycomb shape from when you like zoom in on it with a microscope. But that similar shape can actually take on a lot of different forms. And we get a lot of interesting solid materials out of carbon structured slightly differently, but off this similar kind of graphite structure. So here is a graphene sheet, which is that same hexagon of carbon atoms bonded into this honeycomb shape. And if it's wrapped up in a ball with little pentagons, we get a buckyball, named after Buckminster Fullerene, who created the geodesic dome, which is an amazing structure. And I highly recommend, there's an amazing documentary about Buckminster Fullerene I recommend. Not that I can remember the title of it, but it's super cool. But this graphene sheet can also be wrapped or like built, or not built, I guess you are building it in the lab, but formed in a tube structure. And this is how we get carbon nanotubes. Or you can have stacked sheets of graphene as well. And the properties of these are very different. And we've been throwing these interesting materials at different problems for a while now, and it's interesting what it can solve. I think one of the more trivial versions of like carbon nanotubes is like t-shirts or shirts that are made with carbon nanotube fibers, and then you can like, there's the show where they have a pocket and someone pours their drink into the pocket and they drink from it because it's it creates this hydrophobic like environment, and so the water doesn't leak out of the pocket and it cleans up very easily. But moving past carbon, um, solid structure chemistry and what we're going to be learning about here has huge applications, especially in engineering. So, kind of one of the big areas in chemistry is battery chemistry, which is really based on solid structures currently. And so, here's a picture of a lithium ion battery that it involves graphene layers that you can see with the black over here at the anode. And then we have oxygen and transition metals that typically make up the cathode. And kind of one of the great challenges of chemistry is developing better batteries that are less harmful for the environment, but also that last much longer and are smaller. Another place that we see this type of chemistry when we look at solid structures and crystalline structures is in our bones. Hydroxyapatite is this calcium structure, solid structure that forms, and here's a unit cell of it, which we'll talk about here in a minute. It's kind of like the smallest unit possible of it. But our bones are a formation of a crystalline structure of calcium ions, phosphate ions, and hydroxide ions. And as we know, they're very strong. They still break, but very strong. And so this is a really rich field. And as you explore it, we're just going to scratch the surface and give you a little bit here in introductory chemistry. But if you continue on with chemistry classes and you go into inorganic chemistry, you'll learn a lot more about solid state chemistry. And then you can kind of keep going in this field into materials science and trying to really leverage these 3D or this kind of macroscopic structures, these crystalline structures, to make materials that are tuned to do what we want them to do. A couple more. Apparently have quite a few of these examples. I think this is the last page of them. Another place that we see solid structures in research is with photovoltaic cells. And looking at different crystalline structures of silicon and other materials to develop a solar cell that can absorb a wide range of wavelengths of energy and do that efficiently. Also, we get light emitting diodes or LED lights from solid state chemistry. Here's gallium arsenide right here and its structure. And this is used to make the LED lights that are in my room right now, and also the fun ones like the blue, red, and green ones that you see shown here.